Okay, so we'll talk about producer surplus now. And producer surplus is a little bit conceptually easier because it's basically like profit. They get paid a certain amount, they have a cost, it's just the difference. So it's like the profit. All right, now the supply curve, oh, I don't know why that's there. What's that there? I don't know why it says lecture slides. Won't go away. Oh well. Okay. Okay, so the supply curve represents the marginal cost. So the cost per unit that the supplier has to pay to produce the good. Right? Demand measures marginal benefit to the consumer. Supply measures the marginal cost to the producer. And the marginal cost will increase. So this is something that we talked about in Chapter 2 when we, with the production possibility curve. We talked about the idea that costs of production almost always increase as you try to produce more and more of something. And that's because when you first start production, you first use the resources that will be the most productive or least costly, right? You start with your very best resources. But then as you try to produce more and more, and you're already using the best resources, now you have to use the second best and the third best and so on. So as you try to increase production, you're using resources that are less productive and therefore more costly. So increased production, marginal costs go up. Each point on the supply curve tells us the particular marginal cost for that unit. So for the 10th unit, the marginal cost is 8. Right? For the first one, it would be like, say, 4, or whatever that is there. And the marginal cost per unit will keep going up and up and up. Okay, now the producer surplus will be the difference between what they get paid and what the marginal cost is. The $8, that price just tells us the minimum that they would need to get paid in order for them to be willing to produce the unit. Hopefully they get paid more than $8 for that unit. Okay, so 8 is just the bare minimum because it's their cost. So they need to get paid at least $8 to cover their cost, and then they will produce the unit. Otherwise they would not produce the unit. Okay, so, all right, so the producer surplus is the difference between what they get paid and what their cost is, which is the minimum price they would take. Okay, so the producer surplus or net benefit, the difference between the price they get paid and the minimum they would have accepted. And that minimum they would have accepted is the price, the supply price that's given by the supply curve then. So for the 10th unit, they need to get paid a bare minimum of $8. Hopefully more than that though. And so then if they got paid more, like if they got paid $11 for the unit and their cost was 8, then they would have a producer surplus or a profit of 3, the difference. Okay, so producer surplus is the price minus the marginal cost. And that would be just for the one unit. For all the units, so like if the seller sold all 10 units, then you could also calculate the total, which would be the total amount they get paid minus their total cost. Now for the seller, the costs of production production will include all the opportunity costs. So that will include things they actually pay for, like materials and labor and utilities and things like that. But it will also include other kinds of opportunity costs, like the cost of your time. That would also be included. You can also think about a labor market. So when you guys try to get a job, you are the supply curve then for labor, and you have a marginal cost of your time, right? And so then that supply curve for you measures how costly your time is. Now, another example is that you might be selling something used, like for example, a used textbook. So if you offer your textbook for sale after we finish, you're then part of the supply curve for used textbooks for Econ 103. Now your cost, you haven't made it. Your cost then would be whatever it's worth to you, which depending on your situation would be a little bit different from person to person. So if you really liked economics and you want to go on in economics, you might think, oh, I should keep my textbook because I might want to refer back to it in the next year or so. So then your textbook has some value to you, and you wouldn't sell it for really cheap then. Whereas someone who finishes this class and decides they hate economics and they never want to take it again, then you might sell it for cheap because the textbook's not worth much to you. Okay, so it's just the value to you, because then you'd be giving it up. Okay, so it's still an opportunity cost. All right, let's see. Okay, so this marginal cost is given by the supply curve, and we can also call it the supply price, the supply price. Okay, so now we'll go through some examples where we figure out producer surplus, which again is a way of measuring how well off are the sellers after they sell the goods. Now, it depends on your cost of production and what the price is that you're going to get paid. So the first example is used car sales, and we have a person selling used cars, and the different cars, they've got 4 cars. The 4 cars all have different costs. So these are the marginal costs, the cost per car. The price, just for simplicity, will be constant though. So they get paid the same price for all the cars. All right, now, will they sell the cars, and how many will they sell? So for the first car, this is their cost. This is how much they would get paid. Would they sell that car? For sure. How much surplus would they get? $6,500. Yeah, the difference. Would they sell the second car? Yes. How much surplus would they get? $3,500. Would they sell the third car? Yep. How much surplus? Just $500. Would they sell the fourth car? No, they would lose money on the fourth car. Okay. So as a seller, you will sell as long as you are going to make money, or at least break even. Okay, so you will sell as long as the price is greater than or equal to, and in that example, it's greater than for the first 3. There we go. Okay, so sellers will sell a good as long as the price is greater than or equal to marginal cost. So for this example, the quantity supplied, so QS, will be 3. And the producer surplus was, for the first car, $6,500, right? $7,500 that they get paid minus their cost. For the second car, $3,500. And then for the third car, 500. So that's calculating producer surplus per unit, but we can also calculate in a different way by calculating the total amount they're paid for all three cars minus their total cost for all three cars. So total revenue is always price times quantity. So the price they're paid per unit, 7,500, times the number of cars they sell, which is 3. Okay, so 22,500, and then their total cost would be the sum of the marginal cost, because this is the cost per unit, and they sell the 3 units, so 1 plus 4 plus 7,000. Okay, and then the difference, so total revenue minus total cost is 10,500, which is the same answer that we got on the first line there. Okay, so now let's see where these areas are on the graph. Now, okay, so the price is here at 7,500. And they sell 3 cars. The total amount they get paid is the rectangle, which is the price times the quantity. So this is their total revenue. The cost is the marginal cost, which is different for each unit. So the cost was 1,000, and then 4,000 and 7,000. So this part here is their cost. So the difference between what they get paid and the cost is then this area, so this will be their producer surplus here. Any questions? Okay, let's do one more example and then we'll take a break. So now we'll use equations instead. So just like with the demand curve, the supply curve, instead of having a step curve like this for the supply curve or the marginal cost, instead it'll be a lot easier just to draw a line. And then when you draw a line like that, you can calculate just this well, this would be like a trapezoid shape under for the cost, and a triangle shape for the producer surplus up there. So it'll be easier. Okay, so we have a function and a price. And first thing, of course, is to calculate what quantity will they supply. So price is 11. All right, so the supply curve, so it starts at 1, that will be the price intercept, and then at a price of 11, quantity supplied will be 50. Okay, total revenue is a rectangle because it's the price times the quantity. So price times quantity will be the rectangle. Okay, so that would be 550. And then the cost is the sum of the marginal costs, so which is given by the supply curve. So it'll be the area under the supply curve. And so that's a trapezoid shape. So using the formula for a trapezoid, height 1, $1, plus height 2, $11, times 50 times a half. Okay, so then the producer surplus is the difference, which would be this triangle here. Now for that triangle, you can use the formula for a triangle, or you can just subtract 550 minus 300. Okay, so now last thing, I'll just add some letters here just to be clear. So this, I'll put area A. Area A is this triangle, and then the trapezoid shape is area B. So the total revenue is both together, so A plus B. The cost is area B, and then the surplus would be area A. All right, so what happens to producer surplus when the price changes? Okay. If the producer gets paid a higher price, so when the price increases, obviously they're better off. When the price increases, they'll be better off because the profit per unit will go up, but then also they will want to sell more units. Okay, so the producer surplus will increase. So in this diagram, the producer surplus at the original price would be here. So they get paid P1, they sell Q1 units. But then, at the higher price, now they're going to get paid more per unit, but now they're also going to sell more units. So they get paid this price, they sell Q2 units, and their costs go up, but the amount they're paid also goes up. So now their surplus would be this larger triangle. So this part here would be the increase in producer surplus. Okay, so they get paid more per unit, right? The revenue goes up, and they sell more, so their revenue has increased substantially. Their costs go up as well, but then the producer surplus is the net. So the net benefit has increased by that much. When the price decreases, it will be the opposite. They will be making less per unit and they sell fewer units. So the producer surplus will decrease. So now the original surplus at P1 is the larger triangle. So they got paid P1, they sold Q1 units, but now the price goes down. Now they are only going to sell Q2 units, and so their revenue goes down, their costs go down, but then the producer surplus is what measures the net benefit, so that goes down. Okay. So then this part here would be the decrease in their producer surplus. Okay, so this is the decrease in their producer surplus right here. Okay, so now we'll do a couple examples using equations. So we have a supply function. What's the same function as the other calculation example? And the producer surplus decreases from 11 to 7. Okay, so we had already done the calculation at 11. We did that before the break. That was on page 10. Oops. Okay. So at 11, the producers sold 50 units and they would have got this as their producer surplus. But now the price is 7. Okay, so what we need to do first is calculate what quantity will they sell at the price of 7. Okay, so using the function, okay, so that will be 30. And so then their new producer surplus will just be here. And we will calculate that new producer surplus. Okay, so 7 minus 1 times 30 times a half. $90, and the previous surplus had been $250. Right, so looking on page 10, we'd already done that calculation. It was $250. Yeah. Okay, so PS new minus PS old. So 90 minus 250. Okay, so they lose $160. Last one, price goes up. Okay, so $15 will be the new price. I'll start by coloring in the first surplus, though, before we show the new price. Okay, so now the new price is 15, And so now they're going to get paid more per unit, so there's a bigger difference between the revenue per unit and their cost per unit. But also, because of the high price, it is worthwhile for them to sell more. So they'll sell more at a higher price. So we need to figure out that new quantity. Okay, so their new producer surplus will go up to here. Right, so their revenue is this big area here. Their cost is under the curve, so their surplus is this whole big triangle here. Okay, so the new one is 490. The previous one was 250. Okay, so an increase of 240. All right, any questions? Okay, so again, what we're doing is we're just illustrating and measuring how much better off people are when they can buy and sell from each other. So that was one of the first principles. Chapter 1, people are better off when they can buy and sell from each other. Now you're just learning how to illustrate it. So you've got the curves that tell you the decisions they'll make, like at what price, what will they buy, what will they sell. And now what you learned is how to measure the net benefit for the consumers and for the producers, which will change when the price changes. Okay, so next thing, we will put the demand and supply curves together to measure the total gains from trade. So first thing to, oops. Okay. First thing in the notes, I have just added this over here, just reminding you what the curves represent. So the supply curve represents the cost of production and the marginal cost of production, so the cost per unit. And that marginal cost also represents the minimum price accepted, because they will not produce unless they get paid the price that at least makes them break even, so covers their cost. For the demand curve, it represents the benefit to the consumers, the marginal benefit, which we measure as the maximum they would be willing to pay. But the actual price is the equilibrium price. Okay, so in Chapter 3, you learned about the equilibrium price. So this will be the actual price per unit. So price will be constant per unit. And then at the market equilibrium, that will be the quantity. So consumers will get the top triangle for surplus, right? The difference between their marginal benefit and the price they pay. And then the producers will get this surplus, which is the difference between what they get paid and what their cost is. Okay, now this area is then total surplus for the market. And it represents the gains from trade, where both buyers and sellers are better off. So buyers are getting this much benefit, sellers have this much cost, so we have this huge gain from trade, which is divided up. So consumers get some gains, producers get some of the gains. Now, because the marginal benefit goes down and the marginal cost goes up, then the size of the gain from trade will get smaller and smaller as we get closer to the equilibrium. And then right at that point there, for that very last unit, it's just barely worthwhile to produce it because the marginal benefit just equals the marginal cost. Okay. The equilibrium in the market is efficient because it means that at this quantity, all the units are produced for which people will get some surplus. So all the opportunities where people can become better off are taken. All of these units are produced. All the possible gains from trade are possible. And so this big triangle then is the maximum possible gains from trade that the market can produce, given how much benefit people get and what the cost is for production. Okay. Okay, so there will be gains from trade for all the units for which the demand curve is higher than the supply curve. So that's from here to here, so from 0 to Q star. And then we can also use the phrase mutually beneficial transactions to describe those gains from trade from the units. So mutually beneficial, meaning that when these units are bought and sold, both the buyer and the seller are benefiting from it. So the market will reach an equilibrium at Q star, and all the mutually beneficial transactions that are possible have taken place then. So all the units for which the benefit is bigger than the cost have been produced and purchased. Now, it would not make any sense to produce more than that, though, because once we get past Q star, then the cost of production, which is given by the supply curve, is higher than the benefit to consumers. So that would be inefficient to produce any more, right? That would make people worse off. That would be a waste of the resources. So only up to Q star is efficient because the benefit is greater than or equal to the cost up to that point. Okay. Total surplus, I said already, is both of those areas combined. So consumer surplus and producer surplus. Now, next thing is to see what happens when the curves shift. So the curves can shift for lots of reasons, which you learned about in Chapter 3. When the curves shift, you get a new equilibrium at a new price, could be higher price or lower price, and at a new quantity. And so then that will make people worse off or better off, depending on what direction the price is going and what direction the quantity is going. Okay, so we'll go through the different examples. Okay, so when the curves shift, there will be a change in price and quantity, and then that will change the total surplus. So the total surplus is the difference between the benefit that the consumers are getting and the cost of production. But when the curves shift, then that means those values are changing. So demand is the benefit, so that could shift this way or this way, so the benefits could increase or decrease. And then the supply curve is the cost, which could go either way as well. And so depending on what direction they're going, the total surplus will get bigger or smaller, right? Does the benefit get bigger or smaller, or does the cost get bigger or smaller? It'll change the size of the surplus. Okay, so we'll go through examples of the different shifts. First one, there is an increase in demand. So for example, population growth. Okay, so increase in demand. Oh, wait, actually before we show it, first I'll color in the surplus right now before the change. Okay, so surplus right now, just coloring in the total surplus. So consumer surplus and producer surplus. All right, so then the change. Okay, so now there's an increase in demand. So demand shifts this way. So that shift results in a new equilibrium over here. The price is higher, and the quantity is larger. So there's going to be more surplus in the market because the benefits have increased. You've got more people now enjoying the goods. So the benefits have gone up and the quantity has gone up, so now the total surplus is larger. So the total surplus would be now this bigger triangle. So the surplus has increased by this much over here, right? It was the small triangle, now it's the big triangle, so the difference there is the increase in surplus. I'll just make a note of that, increase in surplus. Okay, next one. So again, I'll start by coloring in the surplus right now. And then increase in supply, for example, lower input costs. Okay, so supply shifts to the right. Then we get a new equilibrium here. And there's more surplus, because the costs have gone down and the quantity is larger. So total surplus is now this larger triangle. So in both examples, the total surplus has increased. Here, so surplus is the difference between the benefit and the cost. And so in this one, the benefit went up. In this one, the cost went down. So the surplus is increasing, but also the quantity is increasing as well. Okay, last one. And again, I'll start by coloring in the surplus right now. But then in this example, supply decreases. So for example, higher costs. So higher costs, that will decrease the net benefit. All right, so supply decreases, and we'll show the new equilibrium. And so the quantity is smaller, and then the size of the total surplus is smaller. So this is a decrease in total surplus. we know people are better off if the costs go down, and people are worse off if the costs go up. And so this is just illustrating and measuring how much worse off everybody is when that happens. Good. All right. Okay, next page is a calculation example of the other options. So we saw supply shifting both directions, and we had demand increasing. So on the next page, it will be a decrease in demand, but also a calculation question. Okay. We have demand, P equals 10 minus Q, and supply. And I forgot the P equals here, so I'll put that over here. P equals 1 plus 0.5 Q. And first we're going to calculate the equilibrium and then the different surplus areas. All right. Okay, so we'll start with the graph. So demand, P equals 10 minus Q. So that will go from 10 to 10. Supply equals 1 plus 0.5 Q, so it's a bit flatter. And we'll calculate that equilibrium. Okay, so $4 in a quantity of 6. Okay, the consumer surplus is the top triangle, the difference between what they're willing to pay and the $4 price that they actually pay. Okay, so consumer surplus is this top triangle. So 10 minus 4 times 6 times a half. And then the producers get the bottom triangle. Which is the difference between the price they're paid and their costs. So 4 minus 1 times 6 times a half. Okay, and then the two of them added together would be 27. Okay, now demand decreases to P equals 7 minus Q. Okay, P equals 7 minus Q. All right, so that means it will go from 7 to 7. Okay, so we'll show the new demand curve. And what we need to do is calculate the new equilibrium first. All right, so the new quantity will be 4. And the new price will be 3. Okay, consumer surplus. Or actually, okay, I'll just do total surplus, and then let's look at where that's divided up. Okay, so consumers get the top triangle above the price. So from 7 to 3 over to 4. So 7 minus 3 times 4. So $8. And then the producers, they're getting the lower part below the price, so from 3 to 1 over to 4. So that will be the producer surplus. And that's only a total of $12 of total surplus then. So the surplus was 27 and now it's 12. So delta TS, the difference would be minus, 15. Yeah. Good. Okay. Any questions? Sure, yeah. Okay, now in this case, because the demand decreased, consumers were then getting less benefit from the good, and so then the total surplus decreases, or the net benefit for everybody decreases. But the market is still efficient. So a market is efficient as long as it's at the equilibrium. Because at the equilibrium, then, all the units for which the benefit is bigger than the cost are being produced and consumed. So the benefit used to be higher, and so then all the units for which there was possible gains from trade, there was more units, it was 6. Now, with the lower benefits, then all the units for which there's gains from trade is smaller. It's only 4, and then the size of the surplus is smaller because the benefits have gone down. But the market is still efficient. The market was efficient here, and the market is still efficient here. It's not providing as much net benefit, but it's still efficient because all the opportunities for gains from trade have been realized. With the other diagrams with the curve shifting, where did I put it? Oh, there it is. The market was at the equilibrium. So in all of these cases, the before picture and the after picture, the market's at the equilibrium. So all of this is efficient. There's no inefficiency here. But when the circumstances change, and you get more benefit, or you've got lower costs, or you've got higher costs, it will change the amount of net benefit or surplus that everybody's getting. But the market is efficient. The market will produce then the maximum possible surplus as long as it's at the equilibrium. Okay, so looking on the next page, total surplus is maximized at Q star. So that means you're getting maximum gains from trade. If, for some reason, people are not buying and selling all of those units, so if the quantity produced is less than Q star for some reason, then that means people are missing out on opportunities to benefit from buying and selling units. And so that would be inefficient then. So if the market were not at the equilibrium and the quantity for some reason was less than the equilibrium quantity, we would not get the maximum gains from trade. We would lose out on some surplus. So that is inefficient, and we would lose out on some surplus, and we call it dead weight loss. So the idea of dead weight loss is that there is a transaction where it is possible for the buyer and seller to become better off, but for some reason it is being prevented. So let's say I want to sell my used textbook, and I'm willing to sell the used textbook for $40, and you're willing to pay me $50. But some reason we can't make the trade. That's dead weight loss then, because there was this potential gain from trade where we'd both be better off, but somehow it was prevented.